People who have gone out for a pack of cigarettes and never went back to your family, what happened after you left? Serious. You/deleted responded. I grew up in a very abusive, strict home. My stepfather beat both my sisters, and then when they left I was next. Anyways, one night he made me walk home from the mall because he wouldn't give me a ride. I called and asked around 5 and he said you better have your ass home at 5. I walked the 8 miles and was pretty wiped out when I was coming up the driveway. We had a big front window and I saw him sitting in his chair drinking whiskey waiting for me. When I walked in he said something and I replied you won't do shit. The next thing I knew he had me pinned to the wall and punched me in the face until I was knocked out. When I woke up I remember feeling the blood from my nose and my mother was standing there and told me I was a disgrace to go clean my face off. I went upstairs and grabbed a hat and walked out and never went back. I was 14 years old at the time. Edit, Gold. Thank you kind strangers, you/Angel of Divinity responded. I was a toddler. 2 or so. After 9/11 my mother moved YA up to Vermont with her boyfriend who, for what it is worth, is now in federal prison for first-degree murder of another girlfriend. As that indicates he wasn't a good guy. He wouldn't let me drink water unless LD eaten a full meal, and I was 2, so my mother had to serve fruit with every meal so LD have moisture and let me drink water while he was at work. On days he didn't work she and I would go out and explore as much as we could. We took to cleaning up old overgrown graveyards, since it was interesting and fun and most importantly time-consuming. But he was very controlling and didn't want us to leave. She didn't have a car so we had to walk everywhere. Being from NC and with no ability to purchase a train ticket because he controlled all her finances and she didn't have a phone, she was forced to use a payphone to contact my grandparents to fly up and come rescue us and fly us back. And had to tune it with his work schedule to make sure he wasn't there when they came because she thought he might try to hurt me if he saw them come to take us. You/large PPGUY responded. Didn't leave my wife and kids as I don't have any, but I did walk out on my mother and siblings without any notice. Dad was not in the picture. After. Best decision of my life. My mother refuses treatment for her very serious mental illness or illnesses and was incredibly abusive physically as well and neglectful while I was growing up. I saw the effect it had burn out older siblings with no motive or drive and instead embraced the crazy just to feel sane in the toxic family home we lived in. I was homeless for about a year and a half living out of a duffel and bumming food from friends. I feel like my life hasn't even started until I left it behind. I feel like it held me back for 17 years and I now am finally being able to find out who I am. Mom never came looking for me. I reconnected with my estranged father. Home I learned was in the military from the moment he was 18 until he was HD at 43. He has severe PTSD from his 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's now getting his master's in outdoors leadership, which I believe is a perfect way to use his massive skill set. I don't see him much if ever, but at least I know some blood is still thicker than water. You/Irons Wheatiers responded. I was 10 years old when my mom and dad split up. We had been expecting it, but I didn't know that my mom had packed up suitcases for herself, my sister, and I. One day we went to school like everything was normal, and went to my mom's parents after school. It wasn't unusual for us to have dinner there. But then Mom sat us down and told us we'd be staying there for a while. Ended up being 6 years before we got our own place. I never got to go back to my bedroom again. My dad got remarried and his wife's daughter moved in and repainted my room. When I had to visit them I slept on the couch while she slept in my room. Edit, I clearly do not check Reddit enough. Thank you for all the love and support everyone is showing to everyone, and thank you for the silver kind strangers, smiley face. You/deleted responded. My real dad ghosted like 4 families. His first family, he had a son. He was in that family for 13 years, his son had a motorcycle wreck and ended up in intensive care. A year later he ghosted that family and moved to a new state. Just up and left, didn't take anything but his clothes and his car. Second family, he had a daughter. He left almost immediately. Then he moved to another state, and married another woman, and had 2 more kids whom I've never met or spoken to. Don't even know their names tbh. Jake, John, Jordan, Josh. Something with a J. He went out for a pack of smokes and never went back, his own words. Then he met my mom, and had my sister first. He ghosted my mom 3.2 years later, then showed up for some quick whoopee, and I happened. He ghosted her, but didn't leave the state. She called the cops and my first memory is of the cops bringing my dad to the house in cuffs and letting him go, only for him to attack my mom while she was holding me and she dropped me. Then the cops arrested him. He wanted out, he got out. He had 2 more marriages, but no kids. It's his MO to shack up with well-off women and mooch until they either kick him out or he gets bored. It's really fucking painful to see, because I want to be an ass-wiping dad who's there for his kids every fucking second of their lives. I want to be the exact opposite of him. U/Sienegard7 responded. When I was 18, I moved out from my abusive father. I was commuting to college at the time and I had morning classes, so the night before I packed my car with as much of my stuff as I could, and set off. One of my professors that I regularly talked to after class noticed that my car was full of clothes and asked if everything was okay. Over lunch I explained my situation, and he offered to take me in. I had already made arrangements to live with my mother. After my classes for the day were over, I went home for the first time since I was a child to live with my mother. I slept on the couch for months before getting my own bed, and we didn't always have the money to eat, but we made it work. I have seen my father one time since then because he swore to me that he had changed. That night he proceeded to get wasted and tried to put his hands on me. I haven't seen him since, and I have no regrets. Edit. Thank you for the gold and silver. I didn't expect it. I was just wanting to finally share my experience with a wider audience, and maybe bring hope to anyone else in a situation like mine. Edit 2. Just to clear up some confusion that LVE noticed in the replies, I am a male. Put hands on me is a slang term for starting a fight. I'm not sure if it's popular slang, or regional slang, Southeast US, but at no point was I sexually abused. I apologize if there was any confusion. U/Eonjivsnofux responded. I was 14 and literally went out for a pack of smokes. I was visiting my estranged dad and his newest family in another state. I was meant to live there as my mom pawned me that way since she was a pill-popping alcoholic at the time. I didn't know that, and he hadn't been in my life for years. When I got there, I was really excited to visit and hang out, but he immediately tried to dictate me without any remorse for being gone or getting to know me again. I wasn't having any of that, so he slapped me across the face. They passed out and I headed out for smokes. I had quit prior to, but decided to start up again. 3 miles later in Hickville, I got my smokes. I ended up hitchhiking back and they were just waking from a nap. I told him I didn't want to stay, so he later dropped me off at the nearest Greyhound without any words. Fast forward to 20 years later, he had a massive stroke and was just diagnosed with dementia, so he couldn't talk much. He could say yeah and a few things. I hadn't spoken to him this entire time. So I drove and flew for 36 hours to spend 12 hours with him. I was sitting next to his bedside and it was quiet. That's when I told him I forgive him. I knew it was the last time LD see him. He wanted to say something, but couldn't. He cried and said yeah. I just replied, I know. I'm your favorite child. We laughed super hard. He died a year later, in 2015. Sometimes closure isn't for them, it's for you. U/Mayonnaise88 responded. I hadn't started a family of my own yet, but I was engaged to my ex, who I just ended up ghosting after a few years. It was several years ago and he had to move back to Tokyo for his job. We met in the US while he was an expat, so he asked me to come live with him. Moved, met the family, all that stuff. Then, one day I came down with the flu and was miserable and was so weak I couldn't even walk myself to the toilet. He was trying to come on to me several times that day and I kept refusing because of obvious reasons. Then I was in the middle of sleeping and he started to take off my clothes and have sex with me while I was sleeping after already refusing it to him. I woke up and was like WTF and made him stop. Then I pretended to be asleep till he left for work the next morning, packed my shit, and left. Dropped the key off at concierge and hurried out of that building in a huge panic. Never spoke to him again. Cut off all contact immediately. I booked hotels for a couple of weeks and met my, now, husband. Edit. Whoa, I didn't see the platinum coming. Thank you for that. And thanks everyone for all the supportive comments. Big surprise. U/0361 responded. I moved out when I was 15. I was living with my mom, sister, and older brother. It was my older brother's house. His house was unlivable. The water was orange, there were fleas and ticks everywhere, and, because of his 11 cats that kept reproducing because they were never spayed-neutered, there were piles of cat poop against the walls. On top of that, my mom was a textbook narcissist. Always going out and partying, passing out drunk, smoking pot and snorting coke, the works. She went to Myrtle Beach for a week. I mentioned it to my best friend, who invited me to stay at her place until my mom came back. Halfway through the week, her mom invited me to live with them. I said yes and stayed there until I left for the Navy 2.5 years later. I still talk to my parents sometimes, but it's an estranged relationship at best. I'm almost 23 and happily married, which I didn't even tell my family about until a year after, so I suppose it all worked out in the end. You/Rosidokidoki responded. Mine was I'm going to the gas station. I'm in an interfaith and interracial relationship, and my family never ever accepted it. It escalated to physical violence and I needed to make an exit. I let my mom know I wanted to marry him. She told me I could stay and be less than the dirt under her shoe or I could go. I left. It's been 3 years. I went back once to get my clothes, but haven't been back. It's been super trying. They still have some contact with me, but refuse to accept my one and only boundary. Show me that you can even fucking acknowledge my fiancé, and then we can start rebuilding. Ultimately, I had to walk away from a place where I was being punished for not doing my duty as a daughter, which is putting my happiness second to the respect of the family name. This was the first time in my life I ever truly wanted something just for me, and they couldn't handle it. So now, they're stuck in a place where I'm the bad guy and I'll always be the bad guy, because to them I should be falling over myself to get my moms to forgive me and I just don't. It's really opened my eyes to how toxic my family actually is, and how conservatively I was being raised. My biggest sadness is that my brothers, who I love very dearly, cannot fathom going against my mom. But I'm a better and healthier person now, and I would never go back, even if you told me I would love a normal life with all of my family talking to me. You/PatSimpD responded. I did this. My parents are A-grade assholes and at the age of 16L overheard my mother telling my sister I was being kicked out soon. So I took matters into my own hands, packed my shit and left at 2 a.m. They didn't notice for a couple of days. I put an ad in the local paper for free stuff which was every bit of furniture I left there. They rang my other sister, who I moved in with, and was so mad. Not that I had left, more that I had given all their stuff away. Fast forward 20 years and I still don't have a relationship with my parents. They call me once or twice a year to ask for money, which the answer is always a firm fuck no. Heard around town that they were upset I just vanished in the middle of the night. They had to keep up their public image. You/Dylan Meme responded. This may not fit the post criteria, but I'll tell my short story. When I was 16, my relationship with my mother hit rock bottom. We had never gotten along really at all, and my pending possession of marijuana charge definitely didn't help it. Illegal southern state, Christian family. At this time we were living with a different family, due to some financial problems we were having, who also saw me and what I do as pure sin. One night I overheard the upstairs family talking to my parents. Yes, that's what we called them. We lived in their basement FFS, and they were giving my parents hell about me. Calling me a drug dealer, saying how unwelcome I am in their home, and at one point I even heard the wife call me a crackhead. I decided that this was going to be the first time I ever actually acted on my own whim. I packed up my things while I pretended to be asleep, and I left the next day when everyone went to work. I moved in with my grandparents and LV never gone back. My mother and I still talk. My stepfather wants nothing to do with me, and I don't intend on speaking to their upstairs family again. You/Posalt Frustrations responded. I still regret not being able to say goodbye to my sister 12 years ago. I said goodbye to my brother and my mom, but I was the only one who knew I would never come back. I moved 300 miles away. I have seen my brother and my mom twice since then. I haven't seen my sister since I put her down for her nap that day, before I knew I was leaving. After I left, my mom got married. My sister went to live with her grandparents. My brother chose to be homeless rather than let our mom drag him around different cities in the middle of a school year. I was able to finish school, which wouldn't have happened if I stayed. I stopped trying to accidentally walk in front of traffic or overdose on my prescriptions. Started eating food. Got basically blackmailed into seeing my mom after 6 years while my ex pretended we were together. I finally found a family that actually liked me. Met my boyfriend. Friends for 8 years. Together for 4. Got my own cat. Have my own apartment with bills paid early. Overall it has been great in between my mom popping into my life. You/Everything to Los responded. My mom left when I was 10. In hindsight, I think my dad saw it coming because we took a spur-of-the-moment trip to my aunt's house 9 hours away. My mom wanted to take my little sister with her, so that was the best way to keep that from happening. My half-brother, on my mom's side, stayed home so he could work. He called my dad saying that he saw mom just drive by and not come home. Needless to say, we headed home that night to her having taken everything she could fit in the car and headed to Georgia, the entire country away from us. We received birthday cards for the first year and then she fell off the face of the earth. When I was 16, we got a call from one of my other sisters telling me she had died at age 45 of natural causes. Us, her actual children, weren't even listed as next of kin to be notified. Her sister-in-law still tries to extort money from us after 7 years. You/from Kasetikan responded. I did, and most days I don't regret it. My parents divorced when I was young, and I never really had any contact with my father. My mother was emotionally abusive growing up, and never failed to say I was overweight or a failure. My stepfather was always super strict, and we simply never got along. The summer after I graduated from high school, my stepfather lost his job. This caused my mother to go into a downward spiral, causing her to starve herself and constantly scream at the people around here. My stepdad always came up with reasons to not be home, and they almost divorced over it. My mother took $800 from my own paychecks to help pay the bills without my permission. After she did that, I finally had enough. The day, got a new job where I knew I could afford to live on my own. I got the hell out within a couple days. I moved all of my own stuff out their house, and never looked back. It probably drove my mother off the edge, but I don't regret doing it at all. Fast forward to now, they ended up moving to a new state and I don't talk to any of them. The whole situation has caused my brothers and sister to not want to talk to me, but I understand. I still struggle terribly, having anxiety attacks and spouts of depression often. It's hard not having any family to talk to when things get rough, but I would never have it any other way. You/Titty Spaghettio responded. I didn't actually do it, but my ex-boyfriend did. We had been dating for 3 years by the time I got pregnant. We broke up early into my pregnancy, but we remained civil with each other. We were young, I lived with my parents and he lived with his dad and 3 brothers. Never seen his mother. He told me she left him and his brothers behind when he was about 5 and moved to another state. One day, he came to me and told me he had been talking to his mom. He was happy about it, and I was happy for him. Time went on, and eventually he told me that his mother paid for a round-trip ticket for him and his brothers to go and visit her. Long story short, he left and never came back. Our son is 3 years old and he has never met him, never spoken to him, and never told his family about him either. He used to ask me about him here and there, but that eventually stopped too. His entire plan was to leave me pregnant and alone. Without telling his family about this, he sort of brushed my child under the rug. He has had another baby since, and is completely involved in her life. You/a Crystal Rose responded. Not my story, but a few years ago my ex-friend messaged me in hysterics. Apparently, they took her oldest out for dinner for his 18th birthday the night before and she said everything was great. The day she called me he turned 18. They, her and her husband, his stepdad, woke up to find the son was gone. He had packed up all of his stuff in the middle of the night and just left. No note, no call, nothing. He moved in with his dad I guess and hasn't spoken to them since. It's been 3 years. Come to find out she and her husband are terribly abusive to their kids. They don't know this, but her second oldest son turns 18 this year and he too plans on moving out that day and never speaking to them again. Seriously, they are terrible parents. The oldest kid is doing amazing now. You/super_Becca responded. I was a freshman in high school, about 14 to 15 years old. I was living with my dad and, now ex-stepmom in less than ideal conditions, mostly emotional abuse and neglect. After talking to my friends and a trusted teacher about what I should do, I decided to see if I could move back in with my mom. I didn't tell my dad or ex-stepmom. I just stayed home from school that day and called my mom to come get me. I didn't have too much time to prep because my dad would have caught on, so I had 30 minutes to throw the things I wanted to keep in a garbage bag, grab my cat, and leave. The worst part of the storm came when I decided that going back for a weekend visit was the right thing to do. My father sat me down, screamed in my face for 3 hours, and told me how I would never really be his daughter again. He wouldn't even let me get tissues to blow my nose. I had to sit there with thick ropes of snot running down my face while he etched the words, "You're my daughter, but," into my heart. His whole thing was he was disappointed that I didn't tell him I was moving. The man partially responsible for the abuse and neglect. The kicker to the whole thing is that he left our family, my mom, myself, my little sister, without telling anyone when I was 7. I really wanted to throw that in his face. I learned it from you. Don't think he'd find it as funny as I do. You/Tpizabra responded. I don't know if this counts, but when I was 17 I was on probation and I had a curfew for it. Well, I had met this girl and we hooked up. I fell asleep and I woke up and I had a text from my mom saying that because I didn't come home that night she called my probation officer and told her that I missed my curfew, so my PO put out a detention order for me and that the police were looking for me and to come home. Well, I wasn't going for that shit, so Elle told the girl I hooked up with what was up and we talked to her parents what was up. They let me stay with them, and her dad gave me a job at his company so I could save up enough to go where I was gonna go. So about a month into this, me and her dad were talking, and he told me he liked how I worked and that if I wanted to I could turn myself in and he would help me fight my case and go to bat for me, and in return I could work for him, and I could continue staying with them because my home life wasn't that great. So naturally I thought that was a better deal than being on the run and being caught later down the line. It's better to go in on your own terms. So that's what I did. We talked to my PO and she agreed not to send me to detention while I'm fighting my case, and I just stayed with them. You/deleted responded. Not married or with kids, but siblings and parents, thus everyone else in the family. But I parked my car 2 blocks over, told my neighbors I had someone stalking me that would tell them they were my family, and spent about an emergency month finding a new city to live in, then doing the move from my stuff to the U-Haul at 2 a.m. I regret the 2 a.m. move. I'm sure it wasn't quiet. I liked and tried to respect my neighbors, even now, and lying to them was fucked up, but it was more acceptable than asking them to lie for me to the face of my ex-family that were trying to track me down. They'd know if my neighbors were lying, that something was up, to keep nosing about. I seriously don't know what happened next. I never want to inquire to find out. They have money to hire a private investigator. They would. I don't want to make it easier for them by showing back up in the same old places I was before to see what happened in the aftermath with them. First thing I did landing here was introduce myself to the neighbors, get on a first-name basis, like I always did before this ever had to happen. Good to be respected in the neighborhood, even better to have people who'll tell you if someone is nosing about. I'm probably out of the will, and out of almost $1 million of inheritance, but fuck that. Happiness, security and lack of paranoia is worth it. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Leave your own stories down below, I would love to read them. If you would like to see more videos like this, please like and subscribe, it helps me out greatly.